Yes, if I could just ask people who aren't speaking to turn their mics off so that we don't get so we don't interrupt each other, because it makes it, sometimes it just goes a bit weird. And so welcome everybody to our, I think it's 8th Kurdish Tuesday. So I'm Sarah Glynn from Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan, and our previous sessions we've largely looked at political developments. Today we're going to look at what we might try and do to influence those developments, which is something, of course, we did begin to discuss the other day when we looked at Boycott Turkey. Obviously, what we can do is somewhat restrictive with COVID-19, but not totally restricted. And in fact, even yesterday, just yesterday, there was a banner drop outside of the Leonardo Arms Factory in Edinburgh, which is a factory that sells arms to Turkey, among other things. And we've all taken part, I think, in protests against the attacks on Bashur. And of course, we can also organise Kurdish Tuesdays and a whole lot of other things online. I mean, it's just been brilliant to contact with people across the world. So we've got lots of speakers today, so I'm going to shut up and get started. And I'm going to also have to try and be quite fierce with the timekeeping, which isn't an easy thing to do while you're all online. I've asked all the speakers really to focus on sort of one or two things from their organisations, because I think there's probably quite a lot of overlap, what we all do, and it's tempting to list everything, but hopefully if we're going to learn from each other, to try and focus on the things that really we feel that we maybe are specialists in. And I was want to start by asking Les Levidoff of the Campaign Against Criminalising Communities to kind of set the scene for us about the hostile environment in which we're all having to operate as activists. So Les, are you all right? Have you got the PowerPoint on your screen? Are you able to share your screen? You should be able to as a co-host. Great. Yeah? Everybody got that?
No, right. The Campaign Against Criminalising Communities was established in the year 2000, 2 decades ago, initially to oppose the Terrorism Act 2000, and then we found ourselves having to oppose every subsequent addition to that armory. It was founded with especially Kurdish activists, and then eventually with activists from all the other national liberation movements or movements for national self-determination, which were predictably targets of that legislation. But the aim was to delegitimize, demonize, marginalize any effective opposition to the state terrorist regimes allied to the UK. And predictably, the Terrorism Act 2000 was implemented by banning a long list of organizations, which was a way of targeting the communities in this country, which were at least sympathetic to or supporting those organizations based in their home countries, such as the PKK, the Tamil Tigers, Hamas, Baluchistan group, etc., etc. The political aims of this legislation can be seen from the original documents. Now, for several decades, beforehand, of course, imperialist regimes had routinely thrown the word terrorist at opposition movements throughout the world, especially Latin America. But the Terrorism Act 2000 was a turning point by giving a formal, broad definition of terrorism, which includes now the threat of serious damage to property in ways designed to influence the government for a political cause. And this is mirrored in the EC directive on so-called terrorism enacted shortly thereafter. So you can see this definition could describe almost all mass protests going back several centuries. And it could also describe the actions of terrorist states, except that was unthinkable for the political agenda here, which is to demonize opposition to those states allied with the UK. Now, the rationale was made explicit in a report a couple years earlier by a so-called terrorism expert, Professor Paul Wilkinson, where he described the problem facing what we would call imperialist regimes and their terrorist allies, namely what he called a terrorist group looks internationally, quote, for any ideological, political, or diplomatic support it can manage to obtain. He calls this sub-state terrorism, typically weapon of the weak, that is gaining all these symbolic forms of support is now to be defined as itself terrorism. And that is reflected in the language of the act, whereby simply displaying the symbol of a banned terrorist organization or appearing on a platform, including a speaker from such an organization, it becomes a terrorist crime. And as Tony Benn warned back then, around the time the so-called terrorist list of organizations being published, he said this is an agreement among governments of the world that no government is to be challenged with support from outside. As he said, it's nothing to do with human rights, very little to do with terrorism as it had been previously understood. In a global economy, Britain wants to trade with repressive regimes, and if they find these regimes are complaining that there are people in London campaigning for Kurdish rights, for Tamil rights, or Kashmiri rights, then the British government is expected to respond, as it well did. And we called ourselves the Campaign Against Criminalizing Communities because the act created so many new crimes, which previously, were not crimes, were simply, accepted as freedom of speech. But it turned out the penalties went far beyond criminal prosecutions. They also included what we call executive powers of authorizing the Home Secretary to inflict a wide range of punishments without any judicial procedure. So we call this punishment without trial. I'm trying to move on. All right. It's not moving on. Oh, here. Well, whatever I do, it doesn't move on. I'll go back.
Is that your screen it's not moving on? It's not that it's not moving on.
Oh, here. Okay. Oh, okay. Now I know how to do it. The mouse did it. So let's start with the Kurds. So after the government published its list of banned terrorist organizations, predictably including the PKK, it was a mass demonstration of 6,000 people in front of the Home Office, many of them wearing T-shirts saying, "I am the PKK," defying the police to arrest them under the new powers, as the police could have well done, but of course they weren't stupid. So instead, they selected a few people, including refugees, as the targets of a prosecution a few years later. And around the time of the trial, one of them was secretly offered a deal. If you agree to help us, meaning to become an informer on your fellow Kurds, then we'll give you some help with your claim for asylum. He refused and went public, and that is in microcosm a primary purpose, among others, of these so-called anti-terror powers, to intimidate people, to become informers. And nobody knows how many have done so, but that itself spreads fear and distrust among migrant communities. Now, as I mentioned before, it's a terrorist crime to display the symbol of a banned terrorist organization. And here you've got two, the flag and Abdullah Öcalan, which became the targets for police attempts to intimidate Kurdish protesters repeatedly, but they persisted. So in effect, that power became almost useless for the state for its main purpose, namely to intimidate people. And that really illustrates a general principle that although we, from the start, we demanded the repeal of all anti-terror legislation, it's really about legitimacy. If people adequately defy those powers, then the powers become weaker and more difficult to use for their political purpose. And here's one of many, protests at the at embassies and the Downing Street. Stop criminalizing lawyers in Turkey, whose anti-terrorist laws had many parallels with the ones in Britain. And in fact, when the Turkish government was being criticized by human rights organizations for those undemocratic repressive powers, they referred to Britain as an example. Right? So therefore, it must be okay. If it's okay for Britain, it's okay for Turkey. And this illustrates how the Terrorism Act 2000 was used ideologically to justify similar powers all over the world and to legitimize terrorist states, as well as to delegitimize the mass movements opposing those states. Here's our friend Mark Thomas, who in the course of defying or circumventing the ban on protests in Parliament Square, organized one, saying PKK is not terrorist. And now here's a slide pointing out the political paradox of what these terrorism labels really mean in practice, where ISIS was permitted to recruit openly on the streets in Turkey, while the YPG were called terrorists. And here's one of the prosecutions against people in Britain who wanted to join the fight against ISIS with their brothers and sisters in the YPG. And of course, we launched a campaign to defend her from that prosecution. And there are many now returnees, British citizens, who are being harassed, some being prosecuted for having fought against ISIS in Kurdistan and Rojava in particular. So all these cases need mass support in order to turn the tables on the state, to put the state on trial for its collusion with the terrorist state regime of Turkey. Now we move on to Tamils. As I mentioned before, the Tamil Tigers is one of the many organizations that were banned in order to intimidate the Tamil communities here, which were opposing the terrorist state regime of Sri Lanka. And here's one of the many mass protests that were held during the war in around 2009 in Sri Lanka. And in particular, when the EU was renewing its ban on so-called terrorist organizations, including the Tamil Tigers, our discussions with the Tamil activists led them to focus on that ban as unjust. And this is what they mean by stop the criminalization. They mean here, not just in Sri Lanka, criminalization here under the so-called anti-terror laws. And during those mass protests, the Tamils were joined by many Kurdish activists. After our efforts to bring together activists from those communities that were being targeted by the anti-terror laws, and those links were able to continue without our needing to be the intermediaries. And now I move on to Somalis.
Yes, I'm going to have to ask you to wind up very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay. I just give one more example. This is from the Somali community, where youth workers were targeted to become police informers, for MI5, and many of them went public and refused. We held public meetings in Camden Town Hall, because that's their location in the borough of Camden, where I live, to raise the general issue of how MI5 was being used, using the anti-terror laws, especially Schedule 7, the power to stop someone and question them for up to 9 hours at any port of entry, with the threat that they'll be arrested for a terrorist crime if they don't answer every question. Madi Hashi is a more complex story of someone who refused that pressure. And we held a meeting with speakers from all the various communities and that were being subjected to this blackmail by MI5. So these are just some examples of how we tried, and to some extent succeeded, to create an identity, communities of resistance, akin to other communities of resistance, refusing the intimidation of the so-called anti-terror laws and jointly resisting in order to try to delegitimize those powers. So I stopped there.
Thank you. It was very hard stopping you, but it's just I know there's a lot of other people waiting afterwards. Can we? How do we stop you sharing the screen? That's what I'm wondering.
Oh, I can stop it.
Yeah, could you?
Right.
Thank you. So I'm now going to ask Melanie Ginjal to speak on behalf of Peace in Kurdistan. So I suppose we're going for age first, not reflecting Melanie, but an age of organisation. So Melanie, I'll hand over to you.
Hello, hi, I'm Melanie. I'm representing Peace in Kurdistan, which, as Sarah has kindly said, is a pretty old organisation, formed back in the late 80s to work with the Kurdish freedom movement very closely, and with the aim of really extending their work into the UK. So everything that we do, we discuss with them. So with leaders in the diaspora and with people in the region, most importantly. So we're not a solidarity organisation as such. We don't have individual membership, but we're more focused on trying to set up networks with other groups, other campaigns, for example, lawyers, academics, trade unionists, and so we have these networks that we work with. So until 1994, Peace in Kurdistan was operating under the name of Kurdistan Solidarity Committee. And yeah, we were at that point building these links. And at that point, one of the most important networks that we had was with lawyers. And that's continued all the way through to today. And the reason for that was that at that time, the conflict in Turkey was raging, and there were wide-scale systematic human rights violations occurring. And so there was a real need at that point for there to be accountability for the perpetrators. So we had a lot of lawyers that we involved in the knowledge, in the campaign, in the program, and a lot of cases were taken to the European Court of Human Rights. And out of that that pressure to find that accountability, the Kurdish Human Rights Project was formed, and that was an incredibly successful organization. And I say many cases were taken to the European Court and were successfully fought, and remedies were obtained. So that was one of the early kind of solidarity activities that we did. Also, of course, CAMPAC was formed out of that time as well, as Les has just been explaining. So linking the Kurdish struggle with Tamils, with Baluchi, with Catalans, with everybody who's struggling for self-determination. So that was another kind of hugely important link that was built, and which still continues. What else do we do? So we do a lot of education work. We have built up a big library of resources, books, pamphlets, kind of reflecting all the different stages of the struggle going back kind of 30 years. We've also been doing kind of an education program by video in this time. And that's been, I think, a really good forum for getting the issues across. There's been lots of different kinds of people talking in these interviews, academics, activists, sitting MPs, people from now and people who have been involved in this kind of solidarity work for decades. So it's been really it's been a really positive, I think, way of understanding who's involved in this struggle, both in this country and in the region. One of the main focuses of the education programme, I think, has been the case in Belgium about the status of the PKK. And as probably you're all aware, that was a big victory for the Kurds in Belgium, where it was found that the PKK is not a terrorist organisation, it's a legitimate party to a struggle, to a conflict of non-international character. So there's been a lot of work trying to spread that, what happened in that case, with the view to hopefully sparking off similar cases in this country and other European countries, because obviously the label of terrorism it deeply affects everything that we do. It makes people very afraid to be involved with the campaign. So that's a very fundamental issue that we've been working on, particularly with Jan Furman, who was the lawyer who took that case to the High Court in Belgium. So yeah, we're a very broad-based organisation, kind of links with the Green Party, the Labour Party, Plaid and SNP, Sinn Féin. We try to involve everybody. So we also do quite a lot of work in Parliament, briefing MPs, having meetings with MPs, introducing people from the region in Parliament, having meetings in Parliament. I mean, obviously not now, but usually. So yeah, and we also do a newsletter every fortnight, a sort of a compilation of Kurdish news about Kurdistan, opinion pieces, commentaries. So it's a very good, very useful resource for general campaigning. So I think that's probably about all. Well, it's not all, but it's all that I'm going to say at this point.
Thank you very much. Great. Can I just ask that if each person would like to message me the link, the website or whatever, then I'll share it on the chat for other people. I know you can only message me, but then I can share it. So the next person up, we've got Helith Williams from Kurdish Solidarity Cameroon, and also is going to say a little bit about the Kurdistan Solidarity Network. So Helith, over to you.
Thank you. So we're a very new group, Kurdish Solidarity Cameroon. We basically started last year there was a hunger strike, and Imam Sis that lived in Newport at the time, and he'd been quite prominent on the left in South Wales, and he was friends with lots of us that had been involved in anti-capitalist and socialist and anarchist organising. And when we heard that he was on hunger strike, we came together and formed a solidarity committee to support the hunger strike. He was on hunger strike for 160 days, and the campaign, as well as Leila Guven in Baku in Kurdistan, and other people all over the world, people in London as well, and I think thousands of prisoners. So there was also members of the group that was friends with Anna Campbell, who had died in Afrin a few years before, and so it was, and a lot of people had heard of the Kurdish struggle and seen parallels between the ideology and and had been in contact with that kind of organising. So we basically started by doing actions purely to support the hunger strike. The aim of the hunger strike was to end the isolation of Abdullah Öcalan, and the way we saw the police treat the Kurdish community was quite disgusting. The way people from the Kurdish community in South Wales constantly had to create new Facebooks because they just had a picture of Öcalan on their Facebook, and our Facebook was deleted as well. And this, like, I think, like, we were naive that we hadn't realised that the Kurdish community had been into like, you know, so much extreme repression. People weren't allowed to carry the banners that they chose to carry, and so this developed after the hunger strike. We began well, during the hunger strike, part of our actions was we targeted TUI shops, because in Wales we don't have that many big cities, and there's a TUI shop in even small towns. So we had a campaign to try and get TUI to drop holidays in Turkey, and we had support from the radical Welsh independence movement in Dod, friends from the Welsh language movement, different socialist people from different socialist groups took part. And I think there was over a dozen or 15 actions in different places across England and Wales in one day during the hunger strike, and that felt like a good success. And we had a second day of action like this as well. And eventually Kurdish Solidarity Cymru joined Kurdish Solidarity Network, which is a network of local groups, and within Kurdish Solidarity Network, a Boycott Turkey working group was formed. So some of us that were involved in the campaign with TUI are now involved with the Boycott Turkey campaign, because it's a sort of, it was the same sort of campaign. We also, like, from the after the hunger strike, we started learning a lot about the Kurdish movement, and trying to cross-pollinate the lessons from democratic confederalism, the ideology of the Kurdish freedom movement, into the Welsh independence movement, because there's a lot of debate about, as Welsh independence grows, like, it's becoming more and more mainstream for the first time, really, and people are asking, what kind of Wales? Do we want a capitalist Wales? Do we want a clone of the state in England? Do we want the sort of the same system as the the imperialist country? And it's like this ideas of democratic confederalism and genealogy, the science of women. We've had like workshops and been watching films and doing talks to try and educate ourselves and spread these ideas in Wales. Actions, well, there's been lots of quite creative things. During the hunger strike, there was a local musician that actually is in the Welsh Assembly as the official poet for the Future Generations Act. She created a compilation CD to raise money for the campaign. We've recently had an action in the Rise of Progeva Day of Action, where people dressed statues in Cardiff in Kurdish colours, and had sort of a picket outside the TUI shop. There's been a lot of banner drops from bridges to raise awareness about what's happening, about the constant threats of invasions in Rojava. We've done fundraisers for Hebasor in different ways, the Kurdish Red Crescent charity that help people at places where Turkey attacks. And we've been regularly going to demonstrations in South Wales and in London. And there was also some members of the group are quite adept at have been trying to work with Plaid Cymru, lobbying. There was a motion passed in the Welsh Assembly in support of Imam during the hunger strike, and that was a success. But the thing that we feel that we've managed to do well is sort of try and create parallels to help people catch people's imagination in Wales about what's happening in Kurdistan. For example, when Hassan Kiev was drowned in Kurdistan to make a dam, it kind of in Wales, it kind of captured the imagination, because there's been a lot of discussion about when, on a much smaller scale, a Welsh-speaking village was drowned in Tryweryn to make a reservoir for water. And this kind of, although the situations, we can't compare it because it's just so violent in Kurdistan, but the same sort of mechanisms of colonization that the people can relate to some extent, and we hope that that sort of helps people think about people all over the world. And also in terms of the Welsh language movement, people have been struggling for over 50 years in the Welsh language movement for language rights, and people hearing about the denial of language rights in Kurdistan by all everywhere really, but especially in Turkey. I think it's been an eye-opener, and we're working quite closely with Undod, the Radical Welsh Independence Movement, and we've done a lot of joint work with them. And in terms of Kurdish Solidarity Network, which we joined because we did a lot of work with the local group in Bristol anyway, and Kurdish Solidarity Network has, as well as a bunch of local groups in places like Brighton, Bristol, London. There's sort of working groups that are open and for everyone to join, even if they're not in Kurdish Solidarity Network. And one of them's an ecology group, which focuses on the ecological side of the Rojava Revolution, and the ideology and ways that people here can support that. There's a legal working group that supports individuals that are experiencing repression from the state for their involvement in Kurdish solidarity work. We do things like go outside of court to support people at court and try and support people practically. There's also a Boycott Turkey group, as I spoke before, which has people from lots of different groups in it. And there's what we liked in Kurdish Solidarity Committee about KSN as well, was that it's taken a lot of the lessons from the Kurdish freedom movement and tries to sort of use the structures inspired by this movement and use it in the network, so we can learn about these structures by doing. And there's a group for women in KSN where we can have our own, discussions and yeah. So that's more or less it for me. I've probably missed things out, but other people from KSN are speaking today, I think, as well, but in different capacities. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Helith, that's great. And if you could put up the links to both organisations, I think you can actually do it to everybody because you're a co-host. So our next speaker is of course very active in KSN, but is going to speak to us today about the role of academics, and that's Nick Matteo. So Nick.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And yes, often speaking, and it's good to be back on an SXK Tuesday after the Boycott Turkey one, as a solidarity activist with the Kurdish freedom movement based in London. But today, as Sarah said, I'll be speaking about the role that academics can play in solidarity, so a little bit different to some of the other speakers coming from specific organizations. And in maybe a little bit over 5 minutes, but I'm going to try definitely for under 10. I'm going to first talk a bit about why it's important that academics learn more about this movement, the Kurdish freedom movement in general, but also, of course, the Rojava Revolution, the revolution in northern and eastern Syria in particular, because of the role of education within this movement, the essential role that education has within this movement. So both what we can give, but also I think it's important to emphasize what we can learn. There's a very common dynamic that thankfully all the friends on this call are a perfect corrective to in solidarity campaigns that sort of positions us in the global north as somehow giving charity to them over there, giving aid. And I think with the Kurdish freedom movement in particular, although of course lots of other struggles around the world too, it's very clear how much we have to bring back, that solidarity is a two-way street. So I'm going to first talk a bit about these elements of education in the movement and what we have to learn. And then I'm going to end on two practical things that can be done by academics to support the movement. One is to support the work of Rojava University and their specific call, which came out in the last month. And the other is to get involved in the academic strand of the Boycott Turkey campaign, which I was speaking about a little bit a couple of weeks ago when Boycott Turkey was doing this call. So I think it's no exaggeration to say that the Kurdish freedom movement and the women's revolution of northeast Syria, the Rojava revolution, are struggles that are really built on education. Education is at the heart of how these struggles organize themselves, how these movements have developed, and how they continue to grow and remain dynamic today. This goes all the way back to the roots in the 1968 movement in Turkey. Abdullah Öcalan and his friends, the lead political philosopher and founder of the Kurdish freedom movement, and his friends as students in Ankara. Abdullah Öcalan's first political post was in a students' union. And he and his friends in the 70s, after leaving sort of formal academic structures, spent the first several years of their organizing doing research into the history of Kurdistan, thinking about their approach to politics, their approach to being revolutionaries, and also crucially going out to the people of Kurdistan to run mass meetings as well as small house meetings where there would sometimes be hours of discussion to bring people around in this really meaningful way. And that's sort of element of the revolution's organizing model that has stayed consistent, this commitment to really deep discussion, really deep non-dogmatic ideological discussion with people both on an immediate scale, one-to-one, and in these big meetings. So this is something that only deepened as the struggle developed from the 70s into the 80s and the 90s, and particularly in the guerrilla movements across Kurdistan. It's very common, if you see interviews with guerrilla, they'll be in an academy setting. And this is a really crucial and beautiful thing about the Kurdish freedom movement, is that they have a belief in creating academies everywhere we are. Imrali Island, which is where Abdullah Öcalan has been imprisoned in isolation for the last 20 years, has been turned into an academy by him there, by his own education, by his commitment to thinking through, again, non-dogmatically, this approach to politics and ideology. And in this regard, I would really recommend a little plug, and I promise I get nothing from this, that people look up The Sociology of Freedom, which was published recently. It's the third in the Manifesto of Democratic Civilization, but you can read them sort of individually. You don't need to read them continuously. And this is one of the products of the academy which Abdullah Öcalan built on this, in some of the most terrible conditions that we could imagine. We all, in recent months, have got used to what a fairly limited forms of isolation can feel like and look like. So we can now try to imagine on a really grand scale what it's like to be imprisoned and not be able to see the sky, and still turn that into an opportunity for an education. And when that was then given out to the rest of the movement, it was spread again in these big meetings, smaller meetings, where they deepened and really got an innate sense for what it meant to change the paradigm of this movement between the 90s and the 2000s. And to say a little bit about that, and this is a little bit about what academics in particular can learn, one of the essential elements of the Kurdish freedom movements, what they call the new paradigm for creating free life, socialism, a democratic society, is a non-dogmatic and very anti-positivist approach to how we understand learning. So positivism, just sort of brief definition, is the Enlightenment philosophy of only proving things based on what you can objectively see and objectively measure, and not having an awareness of the relativity of life. And I think in academia, we've had this same experience in the last 30 or 40 years. Sometimes it's been called postmodernism, and there have been very different approaches to these ideas. I think one thing that we can all agree on is that the previous paradigms that academia, that historical and the human sciences were based on have let us down to a great degree. It's the reason why there are so many need for new critical approaches that are being developed. Well, in the sociology of freedom and in the paradigm of the Kurdish freedom movement, this is exactly what has been developed. And not only has a new worldview and a new approach to education been grown in the last 20 years as a result of Abdullah Öcalan's writings, also the very practical ways in which education is structured have been revolutionized. So, for example, in Rojava University, which I'll get to very shortly and close with in terms of their call, Rojava University is a university that has been built in the midst of war, first with ISIS, Daesh, and now with the fascist Turkish state, in the midst of war, and creating a completely different way of structuring the teacher-student relationship. I think anyone who's a teacher worth their salt can agree that all the best teachers are kind of self-abolishing. They make themselves redundant in the way that they can bring their students up. But at the same time, obviously, in the teacher-student relationship, a lot of hierarchies can form and a lot of difficulties can come about because of that. Well, and this is just one example of the different ways that Rojava University is approaching education. In Rojava University, they've institutionalized an approach of criticism and self-criticism between teachers and students in order to try and fine-tune and to really focus on that self-abolishing nature of education, the real beauty of seeing someone who's first come into a subject, developed, found their feet, and got to a point where they're explaining things to you that you never thought that you'd be able to come up with, where your own experience is enriched. That kind of ethic is at the heart of the education of the Kurdish freedom movement as a revolutionary struggle, and now is in the center of the new education curriculums and institutions that are being built in Rojava. Another example would be the new curriculums, for example, in history, which is my own subject, that have been developed for the school system there. So this is kind of what I mean by the fact that academics not only have a role to be able to provide expertise and to be able to use the knowledge that they've been able to gain from prestigious institutions in the global north, which benefit from, of course, the legacies of colonialism. So I would say not only do we have the potential to do this, but we have the responsibility to make that knowledge available for people in the formerly neo-colonized world. But we have an opportunity to learn and to bring back these lessons to a higher education sector that I think we can all agree is not on its best legs right now, with the assault that's been going on for the last 30 years at least. With the introduction of the neoliberal university, and now under COVID, the final death knell of casualization. I think if we were able to bring some of these practices in that create solidarity in the classroom and in the lectures hall, as well as just in the fact that we're sharing space, I think there's a lot that we can do to develop. So I'll just end with the two calls. The one is for Rojava University, which I just mentioned. It has its own website, and I'll drop the link into the chat afterwards, and maybe also one of the Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan admins could drop it on the Facebook. They have a website, and they have a call right now open for teachers, educators, and academics, really for whatever you'd be able to provide, from resources to pre-recorded lectures, if you're able, to help with developing new curriculums. Of course, like all of our universities here, everything is online now because of the COVID crisis. So that gives a real opportunity for us, like these Tuesdays have been set up in this context, gives a real opportunity for us to have a really direct dialogue and really give immediate practical solidarity. And on the other hand, there's the academic strand of the Boycott Turkey campaign, which again, I'll drop the link for in the chat, and you can also find on the Facebook. And you can hear a little bit more in detail from me on, I think it was two of the Kurdish Tuesdays ago. You'll be able to find it on the Facebook, but there's a longer bit talking about the reasons for the academic boycott then. But the two ways in which really this can be built is for academics to get in touch with the Boycott Turkey campaign. You can find the email on the website to subscribe and to add their names to the boycott list, which is very important. As Melanie mentioned, having networks of people willing to put their name and their face to these struggles is really important in combating the kind of environment that Les laid out for us at the beginning. And on the other hand, to start passing motions in our union branches. There's a boycott call from 2016, which is the official policy of the Universities and Colleges Union. But like any good motion, that's only as good as its application. So we really need to bring this into our own branches, also talk to our students to help them, if you are students as well, to help them pass motions in their own student unions to expand the boycott on campuses. So please get in touch through Boycott Turkey social media. I'd be very happy to talk to people, and if you message the message, I'll be able to get that message. And yes, to start having a real two-way dialogue that allows the academic institutions of the Global North and the really truly revolutionary education systems that the Kurdish Freedom Movement and Rojava Revolution have put in place to start coming into contact, and obviously both will be enormously enriched by that. So I think that was a little bit more than I wanted, but thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, and yes, if you can put the links up, that would be fantastic. We'll move straight on to Steve Sweeney, who is going to be speaking on behalf of Kurdistan Solidarity Campaign. Steve.
Thank you very much. Thanks for putting on this important meeting and for inviting me to come and speak on behalf of the Kurdistan Solidarity Campaign. Just a little bit about us as background. We were established in, I think, April 2017. This was a time of when the Kurdish movement was coming under renewed attack, as it continues to be the case. And the Kurdistan Solidarity Campaign was set up really as a kind of a non-sectarian solidarity group, and we work with all of those that are fighting for freedom and democracy for the Kurdish people. So there's a range of organisations here, and we work alongside a lot of those. In fact, I'm a patron of Peace in Kurdistan and one of the founder members of the Freedom for Öcalan campaign. So we're involved in a number of kind of organisations, but the Kurdistan Solidarity Campaign, really, we have like what's important for us is to have a non-ideological approach to building solidarity. That was important to us because we want to bring together the broadest range of organisations and individuals and groups as we possibly can. So that means building amongst the trade unions and amongst the labour and progressive movement. So we have people from a variety of ideological backgrounds that support the Kurdistan Solidarity Campaign. I'm a communist, for example, so I'm a communist, a Marxist, and there are others that are committed to democratic confederalism, others that come from a different kind of background. But we thought that this was really important in terms of building a mass campaign, because what we want to do is really see the Kurdish movement and Kurdish solidarity become as mainstreamed in the labour and progressive movement as the Palestinian cause, and the solidarity with Cuba and Venezuela and all of the other things that we see so often at Labour Party conferences, at trade union conferences, at TUC Congress. So we want it to be kind of as mainstream as that, and build as broad a campaign as possible. That involves, of course, engaging in building a mass campaign for mass collective action. So we've got a number of things that we're involved in. I'll talk about one of them. They kind of all flow really naturally into each other. So the Stop Arms Sales to Turkey, Stop War on Kurds. is kind of, you know, they're the building blocks for each other. So, but I'll talk really about the solidarity with the People's Democratic Party, the HDP. As you know, the HDP is the main opposition party, or the only opposition party in Turkey. I think we can discount the CHP, the CHP, the Kemalists, as any kind of opposition party at all. They tail Erdogan and the AKP in almost everything, voting in favour of its wars. But the attacks on the HDP, I think, are really the I think somebody may correct me on this, but I'm fairly sure it's the biggest attack we've seen on a social democratic party anywhere in the world since, certainly since World War II. And the statistics are pretty, you know, speak for themselves, and most people will know them here anyway. But it's worth going over them again just to give an idea of the scale of the attacks. So since the failed coup attempt of 2016, 15,000 HDP activists have been arrested, have been detained, as we would say. 6,000 of those have received jail sentences. 200 elected officials are behind bars, including I believe 7 MPs. The figures might be slightly different than that, but it gives a bit of a context. Since the municipal elections of March the 31st last year, 56 out of 65 of the municipalities that were won by the HDP have been taken over by the government. So that's obviously a very big majority. And these were areas that were won with huge majorities by the HDP, and the AKP, Erdogan's government, moved against them, removing really, giving the Kurdish people were even refused a vote. So this is, not only an attack on their political party, but an attack on their right to vote. But it's an attack on their right to practice their culture, to practice their language, etc., etc. All of these things are coming under intensified attack. Now, this is a good way of building solidarity, we thought, in terms of launching a Free the HDP campaign, because this is something that people can relate to very, very easily, on a very easy level. The direct comparison is obviously the Labour Party in Britain. It's a sister party-ish with the HDP. It also has relations with CHP, but also members of the Scottish National Party, Plaid Cymru, who I know have representatives or supporters that are here today, can kind of get to grips with that. Really, when I always say in meetings that it's what they've done is the equivalent of locking, I used to say, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell in Belmarsh and holding them without trial, with Figen Yüksekdağ and Selahattin Demirtas still in the original co-chairs, or sorry, the co-chairs at the time of the November arrests, still in prison, and the rounding up of the whole of Momentum and throwing them in prison without any kind of charge. So people can relate to that. That's something that we can really get through to people. So the work that we've been doing around solidarity with the HDP has been starting, and we're in the process of this. It's a slow burning kind of campaign, but a twinning campaign. It's similar to something that I've done with journalists, actually. And my background is I'm a journalist, and as people will know, journalists in Turkey is the biggest jail of journalists in the world. So we launched we've got a twinning campaign that we operate with journalists that are either at risk or in prison. So we've done something similar with the HDP, which is trying to build links with HDP MPs and their counterparts in Turkey. Also trying to twin local municipalities, local authorities here with municipalities under threat, that are under threat or have been taken over by the Kayyums, by the AKP appointed officials in Turkey. We've had some successes with that. Some councils are very keen to get on board with that. Of course, it depends who's in control of that particular authority. But we started the process. I think some councils have expressed some kind of they're willing to support this campaign. That's real practical and meaningful kind of solidarity, and the same from councillor to councillor. So we have, if you want to be involved in that, I think the links in the bio, I think Sarah's dropped it in for the link to the Kurdistan Solidarity Campaign website. So if you're a local councillor, or you can pass motions through your local council or your local trade union branch to get behind that campaign, then please do support that. One of the other things that we're doing is linking well, this year is the 4th anniversary of the first arrest of HDP officials, which came after the lifting of immunity from prosecution. So we're going to hold a big solidarity event, and we're currently working on that at the moment. So if anybody wants to get involved and has any ideas on how that, how we can shape that, we will obviously be having some live links with HDP MPs in terms of that. So we've also had we've got messages of solidarity into HDP conferences, and this is something that's really important because it shows them, and while it's a very kind of low-key activity for us in some ways, the solidarity means a lot, and it's something that's I have to say has been quite sorely missing. I've spent many years going on delegations to trials of Figen Yüksekdağ, Selahattin Demirtas, and we had delegations from social democratic parties and communist parties from across Europe, but sadly there were no representatives from parties here. I think that's kind of quite uneven. I know there has been people from the SNP and from Plaid Cymru and individual Labour MPs that have shown some degree of solidarity and support, but it needs to be a lot more than that, and it really needs to be that really needs to be kind of stepped up. And we always say as well, this when I said at the beginning that all of these things flow into each other. And the HDP is key to unlocking democracy in Turkey. So if, for example, they're the key to stopping Turkey's wars in Afrin. Well, you could say anywhere now. Turkey's currently engaged in northern Syria, Operation Claw Eagle in Iraq. It's shipped jihadists into Libya. It's currently flexing its muscles with Greece and threatening Greece at the moment. I doubt very much that will come to anything, but Turkey is playing, acting as NATO's battering ram in the Middle East, looking to destabilise all of those regions. And of course, our point of pressure as well in terms of building a mass campaign, our point of pressure can be our government here as well. So partly it's building solidarity with the HDP, partly it's building solidarity with organisations in Turkey and in Kurdistan, the other parts of Kurdistan. So it's important to build those points of solidarity, but it's important to build amongst the mass organisations here, because that's how we're going to really kind of shift things and shift the game here. And our point of pressure again is on the British government. The British government here doesn't want to see a free and democratic Turkey. That's because the Turkey's geopolitical position sees it border Iraq, Iran, and Syria, all countries that where Britain and the US and imperialism wants to see regime change. So we have to win that kind of argument here. But also, again, I support freedom for Abdullah Öcalan. I think a number of speakers have mentioned him. But again, the HDP is key to unlocking the door to freedom for Öcalan as well, because Öcalan, let's be realistic, is never going to be free while Erdogan is in power, while the AKP are in power, while the imperialists are in power. So we need to again to support the HDP to shift that. I mean, I'm not going to say too much more because I've probably gone over my 5 minutes. Yes, Sarah's nodding at me, which is, I always say it's a communist 5 minutes when I go over time, 10 minutes. So I'll wrap up. I mean, I think the important thing really is the discussion and how we're going to work together to build solidarity with the Kurdish movement. Again, I would say the practical things that you can do is get your trade union branch, get your constituency Labour Party or other party or other organisation to affiliate to the Kurdistan Solidarity Campaign, take out messages in support and solidarity with HDP, and let's build a mass movement to support those fighting for freedom and democracy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Steve. Not a lot over, actually, just about 1 minute over your 10. Yeah. So we're going to move straight on to Stephen Smiley, who's going to be talking on behalf of Unison Scotland. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I'll try and just speak a wee bit, speak about generally trade union work in this field. I've been involved. I'm one of the results of the networking that Melanie talked about, Peace in Kurdistan, doing all those years ago. Because one of one area where they sought to develop contacts was in the trade union movement. So back in 2001, that was me. I suppose I was one of the people who got interested, and since then have worked in a number of areas in relation to supporting the Kurdish movement. But I'll talk about the trade union work we've done. I visited Kurdistan in 2002 and met with trade unionists then, and used that as the basis for opening up dialogue in the One Union Unison and in the STUC, the Scottish TUC, and just talk to people and spread the word. And as Steve suggested, got my own branch to start passing motions in solidarity with the Kurdish movement at that time. The STUC, I think, is an interesting area. Trade unions, as you know, are all very bureaucratic, and it can be quite difficult sometimes to get on the agenda because there's many things which are a priority. The STUC annual congress is a much more open conference than its sister TUC conference. And over the years, the STUC has consistently passed motions in support of PKK, for freedom of Oslo, support of the HDP, condemning Turkey, and support of Rojava as events took place over the years. And therefore, all of the UK trade unions who are affiliated to the STUC, and quite often it's the UK General Secretaries who attend that conference, for many, many years now, they have been signing up and supporting and effectively creating their own policy of support for the Kurdish movement in the various different ways. And that allowed us an opening into basically all of the trade unions in the UK using the Scottish TUC as the base for it. Interestingly, in the STUC, the role of local trades councils. So the TUC, the English TUC as we sometimes refer to it, trades councils have one delegate for all the trades councils in England. Whereas in Scotland, all the local trades councils get a delegate to the STUC conference, and that means that we can build support within the local trade union councils. We're able to get motions on the agenda at the STUC, which takes us into that. So one of the things I would urge people to do is in terms of building solidarity campaigns, is to look for your local trades council, which is a mini TUC in your own area. Talk to them, and they're a bit less bureaucratic than most trade unions, and they'll give you an echo, and it's a way in which we spread the word through the movement. The work across the rest of the trade union movement, like all working trade unions, for those of us who work in that field, can be slow and take time to chip away before you make a great deal of progress. But in recent years, we've had the TUC supporting and affiliating to, or not affiliating to, but supporting the Freedom for Oslo campaign, which was set up by essentially by the GMB trade union, along with Unite and various individuals like myself and like Steve, who we mentioned to as well, with support for peace in Kurdistan as well. And the Freedom for Oslo campaign, which is a specifically trade union campaign to build support for the trade union movement for Oslo's freedom, has now the affiliation of somewhat 13 of the major trade unions. Unfortunately, not my own trade union, but that's a different story. I'll speak a wee bit about Unison in a minute. But that message that the TUC in the UK has supported the Freedom for Oslo campaign was a huge step forward in that international campaign, and had an echo within Turkey, so much so that the international trade union federations, trade unions in the UK are affiliated to a variety of different international organisations in their fields of public services, international, transport workers international, and so on and so forth, a whole variety of them. So that TUC discussion meant that issue is then raised in all those international forums, with some difficulty, it has to be said, because some of the less progressive Turkish trade unions, or the outright yellow trade unions in Turkey, some of them are also affiliated to these organisations, and it led to some fairly sharp exchanges. But the success of the work in the trade unions, I think, can be measured in that when I first got involved, as I say, back in 2002 to 2003, the general view amongst the leaderships of any of the trade unions in the UK who had any understanding of any of these issues was that you shouldn't really get involved with the Kurdish movement because they're all terrorists. They're all linked to PKK, and we don't want anything to do with it. I was warned by the head of Unison's international department back then. That's exactly, stay well clear of that. They're all terrorists. Nowadays, we've got the TUC affiliated to Free the Bushland campaign and open to discussions around that. The other important feature within the trade union movement is the General Federation of Trade Unions, which is a federation of smaller trade unions who come together to share resources. And their General Secretary is a guy called Doug Nichols, who has fully embraced not just the Freedom for Rushland campaign, but the whole idea of democratic confederalism. And through the offices of the GFTU, they've initiated a number of activities, including a Kurdish festival a few years ago at their headquarters in Leicestershire. And they are regularly involved in support solidarity actions and messages to Kurdish activities and Turkish trade unions. It's important to understand that many trade unions have those international links, and part of the work within trade unions is to get those trade unions to prioritise work with solidarity with trade unions in Turkey. And I think for people not entirely familiar, in Turkey the trade union movement is very fractured, I suppose. There are government-supported trade unions that, you know, if you want to get promoted in your job, you really need to be a member of that trade union. And then there are the progressive trade unions who are very influenced by the Kurdish movement. An example of that is many of them adopted the co-chairs rule, where they insist on a woman either co-chairing or co-presidency. And Kurdish activists, many of the Kurdish activists I spoke to way back in 2002 explained that the only democratic structures they were allowed to participate in that time were trade unions. Anything else was illegal. So they learned the systems of organising, and some of the development of Öcalan's ideas were actually developed within trade union organising. It's how you work committees, how you share responsibilities, how you work with other people. And so the trade union, the progressive trade union in Turkey, is very heavily influenced and in fact led by Kurdish activists. Not all, not everybody, but a large number of them are. So in my own union, Unison, after plugging away for years trying to get motions debated at our national conference, we were able to persuade our international committee, of which I'm now a member, to prioritise Turkey as one of the 4 areas of interest: Palestine, Colombia, and Turkey, which has meant that we have directly linked up with a number of Turkish trade unions. The two main progressive federations are KESK and DISK. KESK is public sector unions, DISK is the private sector trade unions, and they're the progressive union confederations. And Unison particularly is linked up with a small health and social care union, SES, which in Turkish means voice, but stands for something in Turkish which I can't remember the details of. But we've now engaged with them. We've had them over to our conference. We have sent delegations. I attended the trial of the KESK leadership and the leadership of the Women's Committee of KESK last year, and again in February of this year, just shortly before the lockdown. And sending that kind of solidarity and being present at the trials is Steve was saying, incredibly important. And it's one way in which we can do the work that Melanie talked about, the networking, because I think one of the best ways to do that is to get people looking at their opposite number, their sister organisations, their own people, if you like. So getting trade unionists to learn about what happens to trade unionists in Turkey, and the link with the trade union movement there, with the human rights movement in Turkey and the wider Kurdish movement, is one really successful way, I think, of being able to build an understanding in this country of the Kurdish movement and what it is going through. And I would add to that, going back to Leslie's introductory remarks about the anti-terrorism legislation, all the people in the Turkish trade union, and I say Turkish trade unions, there are no specifically Kurdish trade unions in Turkey because that would be illegal. But many Kurdish-led Turkish trade unions, they're all, when they're on trial, they're not on trial for breach of the peace or riot disorder or they're on trial for anti-terrorism offences or terrorist offences under anti-terrorist legislation, and that's the way it's used. So anyone who opposes government policy or indeed employers' policy is very quickly labelled as a terrorist simply by somebody pointing a finger at them and saying they're linked to the PKK, and that way they're then labelled, they're arrested, and trade unionists who are organising protests about pay cuts or in the current situation demanding better PPE in the hospitals, they've been arrested and charged with terrorism offences. And one of the important issues, I think, that in the trade union movement in this country, the way we are going is the very legislation that Les talked about, the way in which it's targeted to intimidate the minority communities here, the Kurdish community, the Tamil community here, could just as easily be used against the trade union movement in this country. I mean, the fact that my union does send me, for example, to Turkey to attend those conferences, that could be a reason why an employer could say he looks a bit suspicious, he's probably got links with the PKK, and therefore that would give the police the excuse to come and arrest us. So if you can think about it, less about mass situation, a young Kurdish or a young Tamil worker who wishes to organise in their workplace could very quickly find themselves targeted by anti-terrorist legislation in order not to deal with terrorist issues, as Les said, it's not what it's about, but to intimidate them as a worker trying to get organised. And part of the task that we have, I think, in the trade union movement is to explain why the trade unions therefore need to oppose the anti-terrorist legislation and support the repeal of that legislation. So all these things, as Steve said, are all connected. And I think the Kurdish struggle within the trade union has a lot to contribute to the trade union movement and learning some of from their experiences and their methods of organisation, but also understanding who the enemy is and how they will be attacked themselves. So those of you who are members of trade unions, I would urge you to think through how you get your trade union branch, your trades council, your own union to support some of the campaigns that we're all talking about, and link that up with the wider Kurdish movement. And I'll finish there. Thanks very much, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And if we can then go on to Margaret, talking about Scottish solidarity with Kurdistan. Margaret. You there, Margaret? Somewhere? You are there, yeah?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute there. Too many buttons. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm Margaret Gallagher, and I'm the Secretary of Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan. It was co-founded by Stephen Smiley, Stephen that just spoke, and Rosa Sally, around about 7 years ago, I think. And obviously Sarah's the co-convener, and Stephen's the other co-convener currently. We've got a committee of about 9 to 12 people over the years, and then we've got a lot of individual members and trade union branches as affiliates. All our affiliations have lapsed recently. We've still got a large email contact list, so when things get back to normal, we'll chase all those affiliations up again. We've got a Facebook page, we've got a website, and basically our aims are to promote links between Scotland and Kurdistan, between Scottish organisations like trade unions and women's groups and politicians, and their forge links with their Kurdish counterparts. We want to support the Kurds, we want to raise funds to support refugees and projects in Kurdistan, and we want to raise awareness of Kurdish issues in Scotland and in Scottish organisations. I really got interested in the Kurdish cause through my trade union connections, and obviously when I heard about Rojava and the democratic autonomy that's been established there, and the equal role of women, I was really interested in that. And that, obviously, as Sarah said earlier, leads into all sorts of other issues that are tied to the Kurds that any trade unionist would be interested in. In fact, most people would be interested in, like the persecution of the Kurds, attacks on women's rights, workers' rights in Turkey. So we try to raise awareness about the Kurds and the Kurdish, and we'll link to other campaigns and activities in areas of interest. So in the past, we've organised cultural events had book launches and author events. We've invited speakers and academics to speak. We've held talks in universities in Glasgow and Edinburgh and Dundee. We've worked with other groups like Scottish Pen and Edinburgh World Justice to host events. We've run educational events sometimes. We ran a day school event in the past. It was 3 Ds, I think, democracy, discussion and dancing. The dancing was the best bit, I think, but that was a really good day. Some of our members have taken part in peace delegations and we've hosted visitors. And Figan Yuksadag, who Steve spoke about earlier, she came over and spoke to us. Made a really big impact on us, and obviously, yeah, she's in prison now. Having Gunisar, she translates Oshalin's writings. She was supposed to come, couldn't get a visa, but we had her by video link, and we've done that quite a few times, where people haven't been able to come, but we've maybe done it online. Organised events. We've organised the Kurdish Tuesdays during lockdown, so we have moved online quite a lot. And we're always writing to politicians and political groups about specific issues. We were instrumental in establishing the cross-party group in the Scottish Parliament that had a Turkey group previously, but we educated them, so now they've got a Kurdish group. We link with the Kurdish Community Centre in Edinburgh, and we encourage the Kurds in there we give them template letters before elections and when there's issues going on, to encourage them to write themselves, and we get them to come to the Parliament, to the cross-party group meetings, so they can speak to the politicians and highlight their issues, things like the criminalisation of the Kurds in Scotland and the rest of the UK. Because raising awareness, that's really important. We send out a really irregular newsletter. That's part of my responsibility. We send out details of our events and that. We link to articles, and we have a calendar of regular events and celebrations, and we hold commemorations for like the Halabja genocide. We celebrate Kobani Day. We highlight occasions like Neuros and Oshalin's birthday. Events like that, just to raise awareness across different groups, and it gives us an excuse to hold an event. Stephen said those of us in unions, we've had motions passed at conferences, giving talks and speeches to groups and organisations, and we're always trying to build solidarity links, and we've run campaigns. We'll have a good demonstration. The Kurds know how to have a colourful and very vocal demonstrations. So we've demonstrated in Glasgow and Edinburgh and Dundee about issues like the invasion of Afrin, and in solidarity with the hunger strikers across Europe. A key focus early on in the group was fundraising for a school project. Stephen had met Faiza Abdi, she was a teacher that he met on a visit to refugee camps in Suruk. And Stephen had asked her what we could do, how we could support them, and she'd asked us to build a school. So we held fundraising events. We wrote to various groups and trade union organisations asking for funding. We reached our first funding milestone. We identified land, but then I think we lost a wee bit of impetus. We had problems with establishing ourselves as a charity and getting to be a registered charity. And then obviously there was the invasion of Afrin, and that really kind of hit a lot of our hopes for the future. And some of our fundraising actually turned into helping with raise money for medical supplies and things like that in Afrin. So we've just recently decided we need to make a final push to gather all our funds together. Hopefully we'll be able to at least sponsor a classroom or a library that can be named for Scotland. We're always willing to come and speak to groups, build solidarity with other groups, just like most of you at this meeting. I think that's really all I want to say. That's us, SSK, Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan.
Well, thank you very much, Margaret. I mean, it's just so impressive so much that's happening. I think, I mean, there just seems to be so much going on in all different places, and I'm sure that a lot of the people who are watching either on Zoom or on Facebook will probably have been involved in, you know, as many things all over again, and it's definitely time to hear from you. So if you're on Zoom, you should have a button to raise your hand is the easiest, or you can send me a message if you want to. And we're also monitoring any messages that are put on the bottom of Facebook. I don't know if we've got any messages on Facebook, or if, I mean, I realise that quite a lot of people on Zoom are people who have already spoken, but
yeah, we've got a few messages and comments.
Great. If you'd like to fire away, then Keith.
Chris Duffield says thank you to you all for speaking out. Faris Greason also says thank you. Kurdish people won't forget your support. She also warns against Turkish disinformation online and fake accounts and hackers. Hawar and Sabir says we need action and less learning. Rona Wells thanks Nick for his information on the sociology of freedom. And Rebaz Filsufi Rad informs us that there is a demonstration tomorrow in Basur, Iraqi Kurdistan, against the Barzani and Talabani families being in government. Paul K. Short has a question for Kurdish Solidarity Cymru, asking if they've had any support from Gruff Rees, from the Super Furry Animals. I know he's quite involved in activism. Snai Omid asks, do you think there's any hope of bringing down or voting out the British government and voting in a government that doesn't support the Turkish regime and doesn't sell them weapons of mass destruction? And finally, Karwan Mesopotamia asks, do we have any demonstrations against Turkey for attacking Bashur?
So should we start off with the one for Wales? Helen, you still there?
Yeah, Griff Rees is my second cousin, so that's funny that I should say, like, a lot of people related in Wales. It's a small country, but yeah, another member of that band. He's really involved in the anti-nuclear struggle in Wales, and I think that Kieran, his family came to one of the Kurdish Solidarity demonstrations. So yeah, it would be great to work with everyone, but we haven't really. Did they get? Yeah, I'm not sure if they contributed to the CD, but lots of different musicians contributed to the CD about the hunger strike. And in terms of protests, the Rise Up for Rojava Day of Action a couple of weeks ago, that was in response to the way Turkey bombed Mahmur refugee camp in Shengal area, and there was a banner drop on that day. There were several, a permaculture cooperative in North Wales did a solidarity picture, and there was a picket outside the toy shop, and there was people contacting the Kurdish Solidarity Wales group, sending artwork in memory of the martyrs and artwork in solidarity with the Kurdish struggle. So yeah, that's what's happened in Wales.
Thanks, Helen. Does anybody want to answer that question about whether we're going to get a government that's more friendly to the Kurds? Steve, yeah? You want to?
Yeah, I'll take that I'll take that one quite happily. I mean, the big opportunity for that was obviously December last year when Jeremy Corbyn was leading the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn is a friend of the Kurds, but he's famously an anti-war was an anti-war Labour Party leader. Now I think, we can safely say that things have stepped backwards with the election of Keir Starmer. That opportunity was sabotaged from within. But that doesn't mean that we lose hope. We have to, we always have to have hope. And I think that it doesn't mean that opportunity has gone entirely. What it means is, and I think Stephen was talking about this perhaps a little bit earlier in his speech, was that terrain has now shifted into the into the trade union movement, and we have trade unions in this country are affiliated to the Labour Party. I say the Labour Party because they're the only party that can realistically form the next government. Outside of the Tories, the Tories are never going to stop. They're a warmongering bosses party, so they're going to carry on in that way. And that's one of the campaigns that actually the Kurdistan Solidarity campaign is also running, is stop arms sales to Turkey, but also it's about building that strength within the organisation. Now, last year we had some emergency motions that came through the trade union. We have trade union affiliates on a national level. One of those, I won't name them, but did try and put a motion in solidarity with HDP. It was at the time when they were coming under particular attack. They were being tear gassed and water cannoned as the mayor were being removed whilst during Labour Party conference, but also a key element of that was to stop arms in Turkey and stop arms sales. So we can still move those kind of things and build that critical mass through the trade unions and also at constituency Labour Party level. This is at the grassroots of the party, is getting those motions passed through that forces Keir Starmer and the Labour Party to adopt that position. And then of course you have to fight to get rid of the Tories, which is another thing altogether. But the absolutely key thing I would say about that, in bringing down the government and working towards that, the important thing is that we need to build and strengthen our movements. And at the moment, we're quite away from where we need to be. I think if we have a realistic assessment of that, we need to start building solidarity with Kurdistan and solidarity with the HDP and all of those kind of things to really arm and strengthen our movement. Once we're in that position, of course, and that's the other thing, is about building key alliances. So we're building alliances with the Stop the War Coalition and the other kind of mass organisations that are going to help us to promote this. I'm all for this. I'm a communist. So of course, I strongly believe that we need to get rid of the government. In order to have an anti-war government, I think perhaps we might need something a bit more revolutionary. But we have to have that hope.
Yeah, I'd like to add something here. On any political issue, we should be looking at shorter term as well as longer term strategies to do whatever we can long before the next general election, which won't be for at least 4 years. And on this particular issue, we should reflect on what happened and what didn't happen when there was the pro-Corbyn leadership of the Labour Party. I remember, probably you all remember, when Theresa May, as Prime Minister, was put on the defensive for the arms exports to Turkey, especially around the way Turkey was using arms to massacre people in Syria. She replied that Turkey needs the arms to defend itself against the terrorist PKK. Now that was the perfect opportunity for our supporters in whatever political party to denounce the government for collusion with the terrorist regime. But I don't remember seeing any quotation, at least in the mass media, refuting her argument. Maybe I missed it. And since then, now some European countries, I think France and Germany, have announced a ban on exports to Turkey on grounds of the Turkey's using those arms against people in Syria, not on grounds of massacring Kurds. And I think the UK has become at least ambiguous about arms sales to Turkey. I haven't got the latest, but regardless, we should be demanding that any politicians claiming to support human rights denounce the government for any arms sales to Turkey, and especially for their use against the Kurds. in parallel, now there is a potential opportunity that the trade unions which have members in the relevant arms factories support the Kurdish freedom movement. But now maybe I missed it, but I don't remember any statement from an official of those unions about the arms sales to Turkey. Perhaps Steve or Stephen can enlighten us about that. But that is a potential opportunity to be used.
Steve or Stephen, do you want to respond to what the trade unions aren't doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Les is absolutely right to highlight that. Well, both points about the Labour Party and the trade union movement. Trade union movement is notoriously conservative, and the dilemma for those unions who organise an arms factory, which is not my union, so I don't want to criticise other trade unions, that's not fraternal. But there's a reality that jobs are the priority, and when these situations come up, that tends to be the focus for the workers in those factories. And there is therefore a job to be done, not just to stand outside waving banners, but to actually try to engage with workers about the issue. There are precedents. I'm sure many of you have seen the film Ne Pas Iran, which is a story of Rolls-Royce workers in East Kilbride, just up the road from where I am just now, who in the 1970s boycotted the Chilean Air Force engines that the Rolls-Royce factory were working on, and held them there for a number of years, with consequences which they didn't fully understand or appreciate at the time, but later on learned actually almost brought the Chilean Air Force, almost grounded the Chilean Air Force because of the shortage of spare parts for the Air Force. So, but Ne Pas Iran is one example in a whole history of a lack of action on those issues. It stands out partly because of that. So yeah, the trade unions should be challenged and raised on this issue. But given that some trade unions will continue to support Trident missiles, for example, because they have members employed in that industry, they'll support nuclear power, they'll support all sorts of things. There's a job to be done to explain those connections with what is happening elsewhere. The bombing of Yemen, that the British armament's been involved in that. We supply the Saudis with arms just as much as we supply the Turkish state with arms and parts for their helicopters and so on and so forth that are used to attack civilian targets in Rojava. So there is a lot to be done there, and the only way to challenge that is for people in the trade unions themselves to raise the issues, talk that through, challenge their own leadership, and find ways to argue that the skills that are involved in making arms can be used for other more socially useful purposes, and try and transform that debate, that discussion within the trade union movement and society wider as to how we prioritise production in the country. So I'll leave it at that. It's an important question, and I wish I had the answer to it, but it's something we shouldn't lose sight of.
So I'm getting comments on the side here. So there's a question from Ali in the minute, and Helith also mentioned the Lucas plan. So perhaps Helith, if you can just explain what that is, and then we'll ask Ali to ask his question.
It's just the same as what was being talked about. So the Lucas plan was around 40 years ago, and the workers of this factory in Birmingham, I think it was some kind of arms factory, they came together as workers, and they redesigned the whole factory to produce some things that are socially useful, like you said, like I think things for medical supplies, or in this day and age it could be things for like green energy thing. So it's like the transformation of these really destructive industries into things that are socially useful, because the workers know the machines and were able to like redesign the factory to serve this different, better purpose. And although the workers that created the Lucas plan, they weren't successful in changing the factory, other people all over the world took this idea and they were successful in changing their workplaces from being places that created bombs and things that were, you know, killing people and profiting out of death into places where they were making, you know, CAT scanners and MRI machines and things for green energy. And there's a website, I've put a link in the chat about the Lucas Plan as an approach, because from when we've done demonstrations at arms factories, it's difficult feeling like alienating the workers, but we have to stand against these industries. But these workers also have power in these situations to change what's happening in these factories.
Thanks very much, Helen. Ali, let me see if I can unmute you. Oh.
Hi, thank you. Well, I just wanted to, I've been following just a little bit of this because I joined quite late, but I joined the Kurdistan Solidarity Campaign as to see if we can affiliate, and I would like to offer that and just say that as well. With the Chile Solidarity Campaign, we're working in the UK to try and raise awareness about arms sales and trying to figure out what kind of repressive weapons are being sold in Chile. And it makes sense to join struggles, and there's a lot of places as well that are also kind of going through the same process. So it certainly makes sense to join forces, and I just wanted to offer my volunteering towards that and kind of networking between all the groups that might do that. So just on the arms sales part, but I mean, there's lots of areas where we could probably collaborate as well.
Thanks very much. And of course, you organised and invited us to that really nice event at the STUC, which was part of joining struggles. And I think, you know, it's something that people are talking about so much at the moment, just generally, of the need to join struggles. And yet there's a risk that actually, while we're all online, there's so many things going on in our little area, we can actually be even more in our little boxes rather than linking struggles. So it's really, really good that you did raise that. I think I've got Mark Campbell was raised a question wanted Steve Sweeney to talk about the co-chair system, but I just hearing from Mark just reminds me that what Mark's really good at, which we haven't actually mentioned, is the Twitter storms. So for those of you on Twitter, he seems to be very much your man in organising these things, but there have been ones that have really managed to raise issues, particularly the ones actually that have been taken up by Anonymous and stuff. And there's a lot of support out there, and I think I mean, I don't know how much it changes things, but it does get these things discussed anyway. I mean, obviously we're not going to change the world by Twitter, but it all feeds in together to get people talking about Kurds. So Steve, would you like to say a few words about the co-chair system?
I guess, I mean, it's a pretty important aspect of the Kurdish movement, really, in particularly the HDP. So for those that don't know, I'm sure many will, but for anybody that's watching on Facebook or other platforms, the co-chair system is something that's operated within the People's Democratic Party, and it guarantees gender equality or sex equality throughout the party. So for each man that's elected to a position, a woman's also elected to a position. It's why they have co-chairs, the co-leaders of the party. But this is under attack at the moment, and last year, for example, it was branded by the government an act of terrorism. So this was a threat to women's involvement in political life, because it wasn't the men. President Erdogan decided that the men had been elected to their post, but all of the women that had also been elected to posts, he said they hadn't really been elected, that they'd been placed there by the PKK. So therefore they were terrorists. And friends of mine were in Ankara from the HDP's women's platform, and they held a demonstration because this was what they called a red line. They weren't prepared to give up their right to involvement in political life. And of course, 1 minute after 7, I think the demonstration started in Güven Park in Ankara. It was attacked by police, and the women were arrested. Now, this has to be seen in kind of, I mean, this is again a strategic point that we can organise around very, very clearly. At the moment, I mean, this has been going on for some time. So the attack on women organising politically is also comes together with an attack on women in general. So we've seen a rise in femicide. You'd have seen the recent brutal murder of Pinar Gultekin. But this is something that people are saying. I mean, femicide has been more than there was more than 400 last year, and it's on course to raise above that again. Again this year, and people are saying that this is legitimised by the government, by their attitude towards women, by their plans to pull out of the Istanbul Convention, but also the targeting of high-profile women politicians, Leyla Güven being one quite recently, and the closure of women's organisations. So not just political organisations, and this isn't just within the confines of Turkey. We have to say this very clearly. This is an attack on women, on all women. Not just in Turkey, but again, we saw the airstrikes, the Turkish drone strike on 3 women in Kobani, just across the border. From Congress Star. These were women that were targeted in a targeted execution. Hevrin Kalev, of course, who was brutally murdered during the invasion of during Operation Olive Branch. I in fact went to the police station in Cambridge last year when Erdogan was there opening a mosque, and took a file asking him to be arrested on war crimes, charges of war crimes, and that was one of the charges that I raised against him, was responsibility for the extrajudicial murder of Hevrin Kalev. We saw in Vienna very recently as well, Kurdish women that came under attack from grey wolves and Erdogan supporting thugs who were attacking women again that were protesting against femicide and were protesting against the closure and privatisation of women's groups and women's centres in Vienna. So this is a broad attack on women's right to organise. So again, this is something again that we can organise amongst and build practical solidarity. We've got messages of support to a lot of these organisations, but trade unions, women's sections, we've had, I know for example the TSSA, the Rail Workers Union, have affiliated to the HDP women's platform, and this is another practical act of solidarity that women's sections of trade unions can do. This is something that they should be actively supporting, very active in, and also in political parties as well. And this is another key area I think that we should be campaigning around. But thanks for the question.
Thanks, Steve. I was just thinking of other stuff as people were talking, and thinking that we're all luckily involved with groups, maybe in places where there are active groups, but even for anybody who's listening, who's in a place where there isn't active groups, and there's always things that you can do, like writing letters to the paper, just responding to issues. Local papers, they often quite desperate for letters and different letters, and it's amazing that there's some people who just really concentrate on that and do it very effectively. And lobbying MPs isn't just a one-off thing, it's building a relationship with MPs and actually going to see them quite often. So really educating the MPs and sending them stuff so that they're very aware of what is going on. I mean, obviously some of them are more responsive than others, but just sending things regularly, I think, really helps. And again, that's something that one person can do. We've been asked about active local groups. I mean, I think any of us, will know things sort of locally in our areas. There obviously isn't anything in every area, but well, hopefully, things can always be started and people can move around, though at the moment, moving around isn't quite so good. I realise we've got quite late, we're sort of 10 to 9, and I just wondered if any of our speakers would like to have a sort of final word, because I don't think we've got any more questions come in. Have we got any questions come in from Facebook or anything? Or comments anymore?
Yeah, just one more, Sarah. So Anne-Marie Zogina said she was very inspired by the trade union analysis going back some years. she was at the 12 Puddle Martyrs Festival last year and was inspired by the visual impact from the Freedom of Oshaland campaign. She said the Welsh Government in particular, 3 members who fought so hard to bring this to international prominence because of the hunger strike. And we're also inspired by Imam's hunger strike in Wales, which was followed up by a visit to Turkey. She's asking, will there be another visit and tour of Turkey? Obviously that'll be directed at Kurdish Solidarity Cymru. We'll probably trade unions as well.
Thank you. So does anybody, would people like to have a final word? So since the last one was a Welsh one, Helith, do you want a final word?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear very well the question, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
Actually, I didn't hear it very well either, so...
Sorry, I think it was regarding, will there be another visit by Welsh delegates to Turkey following the last visit?
Oh, the visit to Hassan Keith, was that the one? There was visits, I think, to see Hassan Keith, I think, and I think that was that supported by peace in Kurdistan? I'm not sure, but I think, yeah, there's, I don't know if there's calls, if there's ever a call for people to, I'm sure people in Wales would be happy to do things like that if there was the opportunity to that, and I'm sure in other parts of the UK as well. But I think the one that was mentioned was the one where someone went to Hassan Keith when they were doing sort of demonstrations against drowning it before it was drowned.
Did you want any other last word, Helen?
No, thank you very much for organising Kurdish Tuesdays. Members of Kurdish Solidarity Cymru, we've been watching it every week on Tuesdays, and yeah, we've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome to organise one to help us organise them. Just join in. That's great. Melanie, you still there? Would you like to? You got a final word?
No, just to say thank you so much, Sarah, for organising this. It's been really great, really informative, and it's great to see everybody as well. Thank you very much.
No, it's been really nice to make all the links. Stephen, you were unmuting, so you wanted to say something particular? Yeah.
It was just in terms of the question about the delegations. I mean, it's relatively straightforward to organise a delegation to go to Turkey. We just need to raise some money. Peace in Kurdistan, Kurdish Solidarity, even some of your own trade unions would then be able to make contact with whether it's HDP, Human Rights Association, different trade unions, women's organisations in Turkey, or indeed other parts of Kurdistan. So if people are interested in a delegation, certainly Peace in Kurdistan organises fairly regular delegations, particularly specifically the Imrali delegation, which ostensibly is a delegation which attempts to visit Oshaland and Imrali. Of course, they never actually get anywhere near them. But the point is they declare that intention, and therefore they draw attention to the issue. So if organisations, groups, or indeed individuals are interested in that, then there's a number of us who have taken part in those kind of delegations and who would be able to offer assistance and support and maybe coordinating efforts across the UK. And I think one of the benefits of this event, the Kurdish Tuesdays, that SSK have been organising, where it's Jewish Sarah primarily has been organising, is it's brought together a number of people from across the UK and wider. And I think we've laid the basis for a much closer working relationship. Not that we're all going to get together and do the same thing, but we're all doing different things and we can all support each other in different ways. And I think there's a basis for that. And there's no reason why we can't think about an appropriate delegation of people from different groups going over to find out what's going on the ground. So I think that could be one of the things that we collectively might want to give some consideration to over the next, once the COVID stuff is out of the way, it's easier to travel across the UK than it might to Turkey, then that might be something that comes out of this. So again, I just thank Sarah for organising and chairing the session as my co-convener with SSK, and thank everybody else for participating. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. So, Les, are you still there?
Yes, well, just a brief comment. I mean, hearing all the activities that people have been organizing over so many years, I mean, there's a need and opportunity to bring together those activities, meaning for mutual political education about the issues to a broader range of people. I mean, members of trade unions, people in other migrant communities who have analogous experiences. So there's a need to combine political education with protest, joint protest among those different groups, and each complements and stimulates the other. The protest generates interest in political education, the education then stimulates interest in the protest. So we need to think about more effective strategies to combine all those elements, you know, around some general themes, such as the Kurdish freedom movement, like other movements of self-determination, are counter-terror forces, you know, to protect the people against state terrorism and against the complicity of our own government in that state terrorism. And at the same time, the movements for self-determination are a crucial basis for democratizing society. I mean, every day, you know, long before there might be a major shift in the power relations in the form of a state or even beyond a state. So there's a democratization task, which involves many forms which become more obvious perhaps in the Rojava experiment, but have analogies all over the world from which we can learn. So those are just, you know, two aspects of the political education.
Thanks very much. And Steve, did you?
Yeah, just to say, I guess, thanks very much for organising what's, I think, it's been a very good event, actually, and listening to the broad range of experiences and hearing about what other people are doing. I think, as Les just said, there's a lot of good work being done, and I think that we're all doing complementary work, to each other. I'll just say, really, I guess for me, the important thing is that people go away from this meeting armed with something to do, a task to go away with, and think of one of the aspects and areas that people have been talking about, and take some kind of practical action. And this is where we're at our strongest, when we act when we're united and we act collectively. I would say to anybody that's interested in getting involved, go to our website, go to the websites of the other organisations that are here. Kurdistan Solidarity Campaign, I think the link to the website is up there. Please do something in solidarity with with HDP, and let's work together. And hopefully one day, about the delegations, unfortunately, I'm banned at the moment from Turkey. I was arrested and thrown into prison there last year. But these, again, are really, really important acts. But and again, if we can get some kind of collective delegation around something that's so important for people, and they do have practical action. I've attended trials where of journalists, where journalists have been released because they had an international audience of people there, and the judges didn't want to be showing up in front of them. So it does have there are meaningful practical acts of solidarity that people can take. But just to say thank you very much, it was a really good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nick had to leave, which he did tell us he was going to have to do before. So that Margaret, do you want to say a few words, and then I'll just tell people what's happening in 2 weeks' time?
Yeah, I think education is really important, and the women's issue in Turkey as well, which was what kind of brought me into SSK. I think some of the points that Steve made were spot on. Lots of us have been on holiday to Turkey in the past, and lots of Scottish people still go to Turkey on holiday. If you're a woman and you realise how women are treated there, you would never go there on holiday. You would be shouting from the rooftops. I mean, it's like a Handmaid's Tale multiplied by 10, the way that they're treated. So while we're in lockdown and we've got the virus, it inhibits our activities, but it doesn't need to inhibit our education. There'll be lots of information and links to this and on the Facebook pages. So people out there should really try and read up on some of this stuff and get involved in our organisations. And thanks to Sarah for all the work that she's put in. She's trying to escape to a new job, but we think with this online stuff we'll be able to keep her going for a bit longer. Thanks, Sarah.
Well, and talking about education, so we've, in previous sessions, we've looked at 3 of the parts of Kurdistan, and the 4th part, Rojalat, the bit in Iran, is the bit that perhaps we often hear least about. So really pleased that we've got in 2 weeks' time Dr. Kamal Soleimani, who's from Columbia University, who's going to be talking to us about the situation in Rojalat in East Kurdistan, in the Iranian bit of Kurdistan. So hopefully see some of you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks ever so much for your to all the speakers, and my goodness, we've got a lot to do. We're all going to be kept really busy, and keeping in touch, making links with each other, but also really importantly making links with other campaigns, on the left, with other solidarity campaigns, and tying everything together. So thanks very much indeed, everybody, and good night.
Okay, thanks. Good night.